What if I told you that the last true swing voter in America wasn't suburban soccer moms and it wasn't self described political independents, but that it was young Latino men, specifically non college educated men under the age of 30? And what if, in this era of hyper politicization and racial polarization, the data started to continually bear out that this group is one of the only groups that's still sort of negotiating on the sidelines? That despite everything that we're seeing, everything that we're hearing with the ICE raids and the crackdowns and the declining economic conditions, young Hispanic men haven't changed their voter attitude or their voting behavior in the last couple months as much as we might think. Now, I know there's a lot of reasons why people believe that's to be the case. And we're going to get into some of that, some of the mythology as to why that's happening. But I want to make sure that we're doing it from a fact based position, that we're doing it from a place of evidence, polling data, the science behind polling, but most importantly, the actual election day voting, the actual precincts data that is increasingly driving a lot of those decisions and quantifying what those decisions are. I don't want to be too subjective in this because I don't have a whole lot of appetite for subjectivity. We're trying to do some really good hard analysis here, and I think it's important that we try to get some more clarity on what it is that's driving voting behavior amongst this group that is demonstrating these really dramatic swings back and forth, both to the right and to the left. This is the first time, incidentally, that I'm bringing together two disparate groups to kind of focus on this conversation. Two platforms I really, really love. The first is my Substack audience, which I'm trying to connect here with StreamYard with the YouTube audience. So if you're there on either one, go ahead and let me know that you're here. For those of you in YouTube, I think you're a little bit more used to the admonition of kind of the like and subscribe thing. Go ahead and do that. But more importantly, if you could in the comment section, just give me that kind of tester to see if you're out there. Let me know what part of the country you're in. You don't have to give me a city, but just let me know basically what state you're in so that I can kind of tailor the conversation to some of those Latino voters there. Or if you're international, go ahead and do it internationally as well. For those of you on Substack, let's do the same thing. Let's try it. Let's give it a go and see if we can't also bring in the broader sense of community that we're trying to do, and go from there. And we'll see if this works. We'll see if this makes sense. New York, good. April, welcome. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk a little bit about the New York City mayor's race in specific detail because it actually does give us, I think, a really good, unique perspective about what changing working class behaviors look like, how they're not ideological at all. I'm going to explain a little bit about why Mamdani, for example, did as well as he did with working class Hispanics compared to what we saw in Florida with the shift of Cubans in Miami in the mayor's race, compared to what we saw in the Senate District 9 special election last Saturday, and what we saw in California on the Prop 50 campaign. For the first time, what we're witnessing is all of these different diasporas, all of these different groups starting to vote in common. And for the first time, what I would suggest, what I would say is happening is we are seeing a truly monolithic ethnic voting bloc. For 34, 35, almost 40 years now, I've been talking to reporters and saying day in and day out that the Latino vote is not monolithic. That's probably something you hear people saying constantly, saying all of the time. It's not monolithic. And what they're really referring to, what they're really speaking about, and what they're really suggesting is that Cubans are different than Mexican Americans, or different than Dominicans, or different than Puerto Ricans, or different than Venezuelans and Colombians, and on and on and on. But we're starting to see some really significant commonalities. And those commonalities are kind of what I want to speak to and speak about, because they're really, I think, starting to drive a lot of what we traditionally have viewed as a voting bloc. And there are differentiations. There are very significant separators within this voting bloc: gender, education levels, geography to a lesser extent, and also to a um, country of origin to a lesser extent. But the main one that you need to keep in common, the main differentiator with Hispanic voters that we've always looked for has always been generational. In other words, the longer your family has been here, the more distinct your political views and the political attitudes become. So we do have a very strong stereotypical understanding and view of Latino voters as being largely immigrant, largely affected by all of the ICE raids, Spanish speaking, Spanish dominant, working in industries like agriculture as field workers or in manufacturing plants, or working, maybe in the Midwest, working in meat packing, meat houses, and again, doing a lot of sort of the menial work, that essential labor that we talked about during the COVID crisis. Um, that again is a stereotype that's understandable because it really defined a large part of what the Latino diaspora was broadly from the early 1990s, late 1980s, when Ronald Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act in 1986, up until really about the mid-teens, mid-20 teens. But now what we're seeing is this really dramatic explosion of later generation Latinos, especially in light of what's going on with the deportations, what's going on with the ICE raids, what's going on with all of these voters, some, but also naturalized voters, but mainly the undocumented being pushed and removed or self-deporting back to mother country, back to country of origin. And that tends to be the dominant media narrative. Overwhelmingly, that is what dominates Americans' perceptions of who Latinos are. But understand this. This is, I think, really significant. 80%, fully 80% of all Latino voters, not just those who are immigrants, although there's some naturalized immigrants, and not just the population, but voters. 80% of new Latino voters, people largely turning 18 and registering to vote for the first time, are US born. 80%. And 80% is where most of that US born growth is coming from. Now, when I first started watching and looking and studying and researching Latino voters back in the early 1990s, there wasn't a discernible fourth generation of voters of Latinos that we could look at. There just weren't that many. Now it's a very discernible block. These younger Latino millennials very often are fourth generation. They identify as Latino. They view themselves as typically American. They may or may not speak Spanish. More often they don't. They may understand it, but they're certainly not fluent or proficient. They operate overwhelmingly in English, but they do have this Latino identity. There is a sense that they are not fully white, although they believe they're fully American. And this goes a long way, I think, into understanding so much about what is happening with this voter that is moving as aggressively that it is. One quick second. I'm not too sure that we're getting our Substack audience. And anybody that's from Substack, if you are, join in and mention it in the comments really quickly, because I do want to make sure that we're expanding the group as much as we possibly can. No, it looks like we're primarily a YouTube audience at the moment. So give me one quick second, guys, if you don't mind being a little bit patient with me as we try to bring in both audiences and see if we can't get everybody on the same page here. Might be a little bit of a difficulty. It looks like StreamYard may or may not be talking to everybody. Well, we're going to have to kind of go along without our Substack audience, unfortunately, for the moment anyway. But I've got a lot to say, got a lot to talk about, and maybe we'll do a separate audience there. If you're not following me on Substack, I write on these topics all the time, not just Latino content, but my Substack is called The Great Transformation, and it's called The Great Transformation because I focus so much on changing institutions, whether it's our politics, which are transforming, our demography, which is transforming, technology, which is transforming, our currency, money systems. All of these things are crashing together, not just in the United States, but globally at the same time. I try to provide some historical context for it, as well as some political analysts as a professional political consultant, which I run campaigns for a living. So it's a very different, I think, perspective than what you see from sort of the punditry and the chattering class that's usually talking about these things. I try to bring an actual political campaign perspective into this discourse, into these conversations. So all of these generational dynamics that are happening with Latinos are really dramatically transforming the way that this is developing. Hold on a second. There's some comments, and let me try to. I'm getting comments saying people are there on Substack. Hold on, YouTubers. Give me one quick second. Okay. Well, it says Substack can hear me and see me from some very reliable people. Give me one quick second, guys. I appreciate your patience. Got some really good stuff for you guys today, so stand by. Okay. I'm hearing from people on Substack that they can see it and get some of the comments. I'm not too sure they'll be able to interact, but let me continue on with the conversation, and we'll join from then. I appreciate your patience here. Again, what I'm going to try to do here is start combining both of these audiences. This YouTube channel is starting to grow much faster than I expected over the course of the past 30 days. Substack has been where I've been living most of the time, but I'm going to try to combine both these audiences because I think as we're heading into the midterms, there's a real focus and attention on this critical swing block and how it's going to affect the midterms in 2026. And to that end, there's at least four data points broadly that I want to talk about that were specific to the young Latino male that I want to bring your attention to. And I mentioned some of those in the introductions, but I'm also going to put some of the links down below on both YouTube and in the Substack to get some better reading. The first is this report that I wrote an essay on from Third Way, which is a centrist Democratic think tank. This is a moderate group about young men generally, Latino men specifically. And it was done by a researcher who worked for me when I was at the Lincoln Project doing data work. His name is Lucas Holtz. He's a fantastic researcher, and he shared the report with me, and it's got some really good stuff. I'll also put my Substack essay in there, but if you haven't read it, maybe somebody can kind of throw it into the chat right now so that people can kind of follow along. But I will put both my essay, my analysis of it, and the Third Way report in there. That's one, Third Way. The second is, if you haven't read, Politico has written two articles in the last 48 hours that are talking about South Texas and what that's going to mean for control of the Congress. One is talking about this boomerang effect, this retrenchment that Latinos have been going through broadly, again, most specifically men in the Rio Grande Valley, and asking the question, did the Texans, the Republicans in Texas, make a huge mistake, a dummy mander, as I've been calling it for the past year, in believing that this realignment, quote unquote, realignment, as they termed it, that happened in 2024, illustrate a permanent shift of Latino voters towards the Republican Party? That's what they believed. And at the time, those of you who have been following me for some time, I was saying that's absolutely not the case. That's not what was going on here. And that, I think, increasingly is evident. And I'm going to walk through all of that, the 2025 stuff, the 2026 stuff. The other article that Political ran dealt with construction and the construction industry. And that's an issue. And again, a lot of these, I'm going to be pointing back to the book that I wrote. I don't know if you guys can see it with the glare there. It's a book called The Latino Century. I'm bringing it up. You can, I'll put this link in there too. I'm not doing it for book sales. I don't get any money for the book sales. But when I'm saying this stuff, guys, all of the stuff that I'm telling you, all of these things that are being revealed right now, there are things that I have been saying and writing about for years as a warning, not as a prediction, but as a warning to democracy, as a warning to both parties, that something is wrong, something is amiss, that neither party is capturing the moment. So I'll refer to the book. I'll refer to specific chapters. I'll refer to specific data points. Again, I'm not trying to say I told you so, but a little bit of I told you so, only because this data has been so evident. It's been so clear for so many years. This is not new stuff. Okay. And the problem is, one of the main problems is most pundits and political consultants, and certainly the politicians, are trying to look at Latino voters through a red or blue lens, through a Democrat or Republican lens. And I'm going to walk through some specific examples of how they do this and why they do this, and why they both keep getting it wrong, and why they both can't adjust to fix the mistake. It's what the Democrats did in 2018. It's what the Republicans did in 2024. It's probably what the Democrats are going to do again after the midterms in 2026, when I expect they'll do very, very well. And I'll get into exactly why that is also. So to understand the Latino vote, to understand this, the most significant swing vote in American politics today, you have to understand that this is not a red-blue phenomenon. It's transforming, which is a subtitle of my book, Transforming Our Democracy. It's going to transform both parties. It's going to change both parties, because this siloed, highly polarized system is not working. It's not meeting the needs of what the community wants. We're seeing continual disaffection. We're seeing what political scientists characterize as a de-alignment, not a realignment. See, Republicans will take the information from 2024, and frankly, the last three elections before that, 2020, 2022, 2024, those three elections, and say this rightward shift is indicative of a long-term trend where Latinos specifically, but voters of all non-white voters, are shifting to the right. That's, to me, when I was seeing that same data point and looking at all the polling data around it, I was saying that's not what's happening. There's no data suggesting that these voters are becoming more Republican. There's no data saying that. There's overwhelming data saying that they're de-aligning and moving away from both parties, and they're rejecting the system overall. So if you're a Republican and you see these voters moving away from the Democrats and moving towards you, you automatically believe, oh, they just figured it out. They're finally as smart as we are. Now they're all Republicans. And the Democrats, conversely, will say they're too dumb. They're going to find out. They're going to get what's coming to them. They deserve what's going to happen to them. Once they start, seeing Abuela being deported, they'll change their minds and they'll come back. And the reality is both perspectives are very, very wrong. And I'm going to walk it through some of those reasons as to why. The fourth article that came out was Axios, came out just yesterday. An Axios article, great reporter by the name of Russell Contreras. Axios's data and research identified three core constituencies. One they call this MAGA Hispanics. I'll walk through their description of those. They talk about movement progressives, which is sort of the AOC, DSA aligned candidates. You'll notice a lot of Latino surnames that are running as DSA candidates. There's a huge movement of Bernie Sanders people. My good buddy Chuck Rocha was the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders back in the day. Instituted a lot of these really revolutionary ideas in terms of getting Latinos engaged in politics. I'll talk about some of those vote splits that happened in the Bernie Sanders campaign. But the most important one, at least from my perspective, and I think what my book was about and what is happening almost daily with every election data that's coming out, is this disillusioned non-voter. Okay? So those are the 4 points. The third way, the two Politico articles, and the Axios is what compelled me to kind of write about this stuff. So that's what I want to talk about. That's where I want to go with this. Spend probably about 35, 45 minutes with you guys and see if we can't get some better answers. The most compelling thing that the Third Way research report showed was this. With everything that is going on in America today, with all of the ICE raids, all of the crackdowns, all of the mass deportations, the shooting of U.S. citizens in the face, the breaking up of family members, children being torn from their mother's arms, people being put in alligator Alcatraz, this cruel and inhumane treatment by any reasonable estimation that is going on at the direct hand of the President of the United States, Latino men, which voted 54% essentially for Donald Trump, according to AP exits and Pew Research in 2024, have only moved away from Donald Trump by 4%. Four. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. Not 14, not 40, 4%. Massive shifts amongst women away from the Republicans. But Third Way's research, Third Way's polling focus groups, all of their work shows only 4% of Hispanic men, young Hispanic men, younger under 30 Hispanic men, have moved back. That's less than whites, by the way. More white men have moved away, young white men, not in the aggregate, but younger, a younger age cohort. White men have moved back to a greater degree than Hispanic men. So the Substack chat is working for me, Kathy, separately from the YouTube chat where you are right now. So let me see if I can't pull this up on my phone, and I'll try to do it dual. We'll try to do both at the same time. What do you think of that? I'm not sure if that's going to work. Maybe Kathy, you can kind of send in comments. Maybe you and Linda can kind of add stuff into the chat if you're both on YouTube. Get some of those questions in from Substack listeners. Where was I? Sorry. We were talking about Third Way, 4% shift. Why were they moving less than white men? And the answer, at least from their perspective, comes down to this frame of how these younger Latino men view the Democratic Party. And this is really, really important. Okay. What they say is what these men were saying to them in focus groups and in research responses was that the Democratic Party was speaking to Latinos and Latino men specifically as activists. And what they wanted from the party was to treat them as providers. And I love these terms because they're probably more eloquent and more descriptive of what I have been saying for years, which is the Democratic Party approaches Latinos primarily, almost exclusively, through a racial and ethnic lens. They believe erroneously that the way to talk to Latinos is as Latinos first and foremost, non-white voters, activist voters that behave in many ways as Black voters, because Black voters are the most racially polarized voters in America for very good reason. It's also why I think you see a lot of that Black criticism of Latino voting behavior by saying, you guys are trying to be white, while white, conservatives are saying you're not white. And if you think that that's unique for Latinos, brothers and sisters, that's our whole life. It's everybody saying you're not fully one of us because we're not fully one of you. And we embrace that. We've learned to navigate that. We've learned to survive that. Blacks will say it like it's an insult. You guys think you're white. The white man's never going to treat you that way you think they are. You're trying to, really derogatory, ugly terms. I've dealt with a lot of bad stuff over the course of the past year. To my response to those Black activists and Black online folks is, we know we're not Black. We're keenly aware of that. We also know we're not fully white, or at least viewed by white Americans as fully white. We're keenly aware of that. Latino, by definition, is mixed. We're both indigenous and European. So you're not telling us something we don't know. You're telling on yourself when you say that, your own ignorance. You don't know that. And your belief that everybody who is not white is somehow gonna and should be behaving like the model minority established by Black voters is a big problem for the Black community, Black activists, Black politicians, and the Black power structure. They don't know how to relate to this. And unfortunately, I think that there's a reckoning coming. You're seeing this in the Texas race when you saw this with Allred and Crockett. You're playing kind of the race card the way that Crockett did. I think was a big mistake. I don't want to get off topic, but it's going to be really fascinating to see the outcome of how Latino voters break in that race. And I'm going to talk about turnout and break in just a moment. But that type of politics, I think, is on its way out in America. It's not going to work anymore. I don't think it's worked really well. I don't think it served the average Black voter, the Black American, Black resident very well. I think it has been a Black elite tool, understandable. I'm not going to be overly critical of it. I get it. But we're rapidly moving out of a black and white paradigm. That's literally the first chapter in my book, is moving beyond black and white. And I think this is going to help elevate the discourse for Black Americans as well as for other non-white constituencies, and hopefully it will help elevate the discourse with white Americans too, who have to recognize and come to terms with the fact that this black-white paradigm has always served them very, very well, that there's never much they had to do to change that system, but the system itself is changing. Almost all in raw numbers of the population change, this transformation that's happening in American democracy and in our population, is coming from Latin American descendants. Almost all of it. So Black Americans are about 11% of the population. They were 11% of the population in the year 2000, 11% in 1980, 11% in 1970, in 1960, in 1950, in 1940. Black Americans have been 11% of the American population going back to the Civil War. Has not gone up and has not gone down. So this change to becoming a non-white America is overwhelmingly a function of what I call the Latinization of America. And so when you hear a lot of white nationalists, you heard this in testimony yesterday in the United States Senate, this great replacement theory, what they're talking about is Hispanics. They're talking about Latinos. They're not talking about Africans, Americans, or Blacks. They may bring up those instances because a lot of these folks, but these white nationalist folks, only understand race through a black and white prism, through a black and white paradigm. But the truth of the matter is, in terms of actual hard, raw numbers, the Latinization of America is what is driving the demographic change. It has nothing or very little to do with the numerical change in the African American community. Black Americans are still 11% of the population, and the Latino population surpassed African American voters 5 or 6 years ago in terms of the raw number of the population, and are growing exponentially at this point. Latino voters passed Black Americans in terms of the number of voters in the year 2020. And we're going to start seeing a real compounding in the number of Latino voters. So I will also post the percentage of the Latino population by state here as well. I saw this chart yesterday. It was really fascinating. The most interesting thing to me was Georgia is just above Hawaii. Even Hawaii's got a 10% Hispanic population. Georgia's sitting about 10.9%. Of course, the New Mexico is the top one, then California and Texas are the top three. But let me not get sidetracked on that. My main point in all of this is to show and to demonstrate that the Democratic Party speaks to Latino voters the way they have spoken to Black voters and to all non-white voters. And I was talking with a very high-profile Democratic consultant just yesterday. They literally hire consultants specifically to these constituency audiences, so that Latinos talk to Latinos, hire Latino consultants, Black consultants talk to Black people, Asian people talk to Asian consultants, and I guess whites talk to white. I don't know how that works. I'm not in that ecosystem. But what I will tell you is that's a very elementary, flawed way of approaching race and culture in a dynamic, pluralistic society. What it does is it creates a regression where the consultants literally have a reward system. They're incentivized to crunch down to stereotype in order to communicate to a broad and changing diaspora. So let me give you some specific examples. The term Latinx, which you've heard chided, that's not a thing in the Latino electorate. When Hillary Clinton is my abuela, you saw this in 2016, trying to show this relationship of how Hillary Clinton, who had just become a grandmother, is really like a Hispanic grandmother, that she was carrying hot sauce in her purse the way a lot of Hispanic women do, abuelitas, especially those that are recently naturalized, do. This is stereotype. This is consultants desperately looking for a way to connect with people on ethnic and racial terms. And that works if this constituency actually views the world primarily through that lens. But we know quantifiably that 2/3 of Hispanics, this is Pew Research, 2/3 of Latinos consider themselves typically American. Now, that doesn't mean they don't view them, that they view themselves as white, as a lot of political activists and particularly folks on the left and Black activists will say, is you're not white and you're chasing whiteness. That doesn't mean that at all. That's a really crude misunderstanding. What it means is we are what we call 200 percenters. We can be fully Latino and fully American at the same time. And if you don't think we can, you don't understand who Latinos are, because that is literally who we are. Our biologically, that is who we are. Okay. Culturally, that is who we are, right? The language of Spanish comes from Europe, incidentally. It's from Spain. Okay. We're not speaking indigenous languages. Our predominant religion is Catholicism or Protestantism by 2/3. That's a religion from the old world. It's not a native indigenous religion. I can go on and on and on. Just the absurdity of all of this is like it's so new to white and black political types when it's so obviously in front of all of us that that's not who we are and that's not what that is. But because America has had for 250 years this really strained understanding of race relations, and it goes back to our original sin of slavery, it doesn't have the tools to actually communicate or talk to this fastest growing segment of the population and the electorate in the terms and in the way that we speak about ourselves, about our communities, and what it is that we're trying to see ourselves represented in the American political system. So that 4% number becomes really, really important. Oh, let me talk. So those are Democrats. Republicans, for their part, will immediately dismiss the idea that race and ethnicity matters at all. And that's these two extremes. It's either one or the other. They view the world, the political parties view the world as black and white, literally. If you're not fully white, then you're black. If you're not fully black, then you're white. And that's the way you need to talk to each other. That comes from 250 years of racial polarization. As I'm saying, Latinos aren't either of those. Okay. We're neither of those. So you can be talking amongst yourselves and we're going to the middle going like, what are these people even talking about? Has nothing to do with us, because we don't believe that race and ethnicity doesn't matter. It does matter. We're witnessing it right now on our streets. We're being hunted. We're being targeted. We're carrying passports. So it's not that it doesn't matter. It does matter, but it's not the primary lens through which we view the American political system until we have to. Now, I get the argument, and a lot of people are going to say, well, didn't you see this coming? You should have seen this coming. Look, I worked for Kamala Harris. I've worked against the Republican Party for a long time. My immediate reaction as a person, as an individual, is yes, of course, obviously. As a political professional who reads the data and looks at election results and study these trends, it's perfectly understandable that the failings, the economic failings that they were experiencing under Biden-Harris, and yes, the border collapse, and that's what it was, absolutely pushed Democrats, Latino Democrats, especially young men, away from the Democratic Party. Because what Biden and Harris were basically saying was, we'll open the borders because that's what Latino voters want. And that couldn't be further from the truth. This gets back to this idea that I was saying earlier, that these Latino consultants that they hire for these constituencies are rewarded wrongly for finding stereotypes, racial and ethnic stereotypes of what Latinos should believe than what the data has said consistently for 4 decades on what they actually believe. And that gap, that chasm, if you understand what I'm saying, that explains almost perfectly the lack of relatability to today's Democratic Party with the average Latino male, specifically. I would say Latinos broadly. So you are seeing politicians work to correct that. Ruben Gallego, I think, is the most notable. I think you are starting to see people push back. You are seeing some of the old style remnants. Again, this is what's happening in the Texas Senate primary right now with Crockett, playing these old race cards, and that's what it is. Not afraid of saying that. That's exactly what it is, to try to mobilize these constituencies and turn black voters and white voters against each other, because that's the way they view the world as politically. There's just a complete tone deafness to the fact that Latino voters are not either of those. In fact, it's what explains her argument when she was saying that there are some Latinos who have a slave mentality because they voted for tougher border restrictions. Like, if that doesn't explain it completely, I don't know what to tell you. That's the problem in today's Democratic Party. It's in this wrestling match with trying to shed these old post-civil rights understandings of the world politically, of racial voting blocks, and emerging towards a more pluralistic society where there are other issues like class that dominate the discussion for non-black voters. And what that would mean, understand that the reason why there's this tension, why this wrestling is going on is if the Democratic Party fully embraces what I'm saying about Latinos as a working class pocketbook, economic pocketbook voter, guys, who's that a threat to? That's a threat to the old black political structure. And they're behaving like it. That's what this is about. That's why this castigation, that's why this insults, that's why these things like saying you're thinking like a slave, right? That's where that comes from. It's from that belief system and this real resentment that Latinos aren't behaving the way that they're supposed to be behaving. But again, you can't stop change as much as you'd like to. There's no difference between that mentality and the MAGA mentality, that they're somehow going to turn back the country from a racial perspective or a cultural perspective. You can't turn back time. Time marches on. And the future demographically is saying that the Latinization of America is going to transform all of these systems. That's why that's the subtitle of my book. So having said that, that's where Third Way is coming from. What they're basically saying is Latino men are looking at at both parties, and what the parties is saying is that you've got the Democratic Party is speaking to us as activists, as racial and ethnic activists that are focused and primarily viewing the world through an ethnic and racial lens. And what these Latino men are saying is, I want you to focus on me as a provider. I'm not worried about that. I want a job that will pay me a wage. And we'll get into the construction industry in just a second because it's a perfect segue. I'm focused on the economy. I'm focused on pocketbook issues. I'm focused on providing for my family. Remember, a man who's 30 and under probably has young children. That's the childbearing, rearing age. 0 to 10 years old is basically the age of their children. They're getting up, carrying lunch buckets to work every morning, putting on a hard hat, or going to the factory line and or the construction site and trying to make a living. That's the goal. That's the objective, guys. That's what they're trying to accomplish here. That's what they're looking at doing. Mr. Will, appreciate that support here and appreciate the comment. I'll get to Cuban American stuff in just a moment because too many Cubans do want to be seen as white. I'm not going to say that doesn't exist. Incidentally, and again, I don't want to get too off topic because I was segueing right into the economy here with the Politico article, but racially, and understand this, racially, Hispanics are designated as white unless they're not. And what I mean by that is especially like our Cuban friends, our Dominican friends, our Caribbean friends, and increasingly there are what people self-identify as Blaxicans. Where especially the legacy of slavery and the Colombian exchange and interchange in the Caribbean, there are a lot. You look at Cubans, there's a very broad range of very, very white, blonde hair, blue-eyed people, and very dark-skinned African American, Afro-Cuban, complexions. This is where colorism comes into it, racism. All of that is completely legitimate. Or in southern Mexico, where you get to more indigenous, darker-skinned, darker-haired people that are more that have more indigenous blood, less Spanish influence. That is the legacy of the conquest. Those are all true. Everything that is just said in that comment there is absolutely true. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that third way centrist economic arguments too, because Ruben Gallego also got a huge share of the vote, and so did Donald Trump. so I'm going to get into that. The third way centrism and the DSA stuff to me is fascinating because I think if you're forcing that perspective into the discussion to understand Latinos, you're getting it completely wrong. That's my whole point. Is the same voter group that voted for Bernie Sanders voted for Donald Trump. Not entirely, but a large swath. Look at the Rio Grande Valley's numbers. Look at New York City. We'll talk about New York City in just a second, too. So give me a second. I will get there. These are all things that are written about in the book. These are things that have been, a front burner. And again, a lot of this stuff I've been talking about for many years, it's now playing out in real time. And so these are really, really good questions. And I do want to get to all of this. And I promise you I will get to most of it in just a second. But this idea, these economic pocketbook voters, I get this. I had a woman write yesterday on Substack. She writes a left-leaning blog saying, well, isn't economic pocketbook voters Medicare for all? Isn't it a stronger social safety net? Isn't it a higher minimum wage? To which my response was, sure, it could be. It could also be no taxes on tips. It could also be deregulating the environments to allow people to actually build homes and construction. It can actually be lowering taxes overall to allow the economy to grow, especially in a state like California, where environmental regulations have been excessive and created poverty in a way that is completely sinful for a state like the United States, California, as rich as we are. And California is a really bad example of left-wing policies. California has more Latino legislators than any state, at the exception of New Mexico. And we have some of the worst social mobility, the least affordable housing, the worst economic opportunities for Latinos in any other state, because we're passing these policies, and we've created a state where the middle class is getting killed. So if you ask Latinos, especially Latino men, do you want minimum wage or Medicare for all, or do you want to go work in an industry where you can make $80,000 to $130,000 a year and provide for your family? That's a no-brainer. That's not difficult. They're going to take the latter all day long. And that's how they're starting to vote. They're saying, I don't need Medicare for all. I need a job where I can pay for my own Medicare and buy a home and support my kids going to college and maybe take a vacation. That's what I want. I don't want what has been created in a place like California, where it's completely unaffordable. We can't build. We're not building any houses in California because our environmental regulations have completely suffocated us. And so it's not one way or the other. It's not Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's not left or right. It's both and neither. And that's what I'm trying to, you will hear me, if you're following me, going through over and over and over again, trying to explain this dynamic. And I understand it's very hard to unwind, because so many of us have spent decades believing that this is just a red or blue world, and you've got to be in one foxhole or the other. What I'm here to say is that's not the correct way of understanding the world. That's not the way Latinos see the world. We're not fully indigenous. We're not fully European. We are truly a pluralistic people. And I'm not saying that this is a direct correlation to our nonpartisanship, but we are the least racially polarized group of any race or ethnicity in America today. We are also the least partisan group in America today. So when the Democratic Party speaks to us as racialized partisans, you're falling flat with a huge segment of our group or our community. When the Republicans start saying, see, race doesn't matter, round everybody up, it's illegal versus legal, we're smart enough to know that they're targeting brown people. Okay, we get it. We see it. We know what's going on. And even if I don't speak Spanish, and even if I'm not, brown skinned, I know that they're talking about us. I know that they're talking about us. And so, you know what? I'm going to reject that. In the same way I rejected the Democrats in 2024, I will absolutely reject the Republicans in 2025 and 2026. Guys, that's what's happening. That rejection is what is happening. And so what's happening in the Rio Grande Valley, where some of these large rightward shifts were happening, these are primarily rural border communities where oil and the Border Patrol and some farming is what the case is. That's basically life in a lot of these areas, a lot of these parts. The loss of construction workers is making it so that you can't even build your way out of the problem, which is the primary economic drivers for Latino GDP. Write that down. The loss of construction workers, Latino construction workers, is one of the main drivers of declining economic GDP coming from the Latino community. And I want to explain why. As I pointed out again in my book, The Latino Century, came out in 2024, in June of 2024. Simon & Schuster wanted it to go out right before both conventions for a very good reason. I point out the statistic from the National Association of Home Builders that 1 in 5 Hispanic men, 1 in 5 Latino men in this country is employed in the construction industry or a related field. 20% of the Latino GDP. 20%. You can't build homes in this country without Latino workers. You can't do it. You can't do it. I defy you to find that many white guys that are willing to pick up a hammer, put on a belt, and start nailing 2x4s together to frame houses. It's not going to happen. It won't happen. You have to have a Latino workforce. That's what we're learning in California with the fires decimating the Pacific Palisades and Altadena. These two communities that were just completely razed to the ground. This mass deportation, the decline of a Latino workforce with a lot of the immigrant community going back means there aren't enough workers to swing the hammers, to put the sticks in the ground, to build the houses just to get back to zero, just to get back to baseline of where we were, let alone build the 3 million houses that we need. That's the Republicans' fault. Let me say one more thing that's the Republicans' fault. Tariffs. When you put tariffs on Canadian lumber, 30% tariff on 2x4s on the wood that construct the houses, what does that do to housing prices? It drives the price of housing up. What does it do when you slap a tariff on Mexican drywall? Because that's where that drywall comes from to build homes. Drives the prices up. So these Trump tariffs are taxes on housing. And it's a double whammy for Latinos because Latinos are the ones that are building the houses. They're also the ones that desperately have the need to buy the houses. So you're just completely crippling this economy. Now, for the Democrats, everybody cheering, going, so yeah, it's the Republicans. The number one limitation to build housing in California, number one, the most Latino state in the union with the worst housing crisis, is our environmental regulations. We've been sold this idea that somehow you could have a jobs environment balance. Remember that in the Obama era? Well, complete horseshit. Excuse me, for all you kids living there watching at home. It's a complete lie. In California, we have done a lot on the environmental front, and that's great. But you know what? We've gone the opposite direction in poverty, in middle-class home ownership, in the cost of housing, and most importantly, the income inequality divide. You don't hear Democrats talking a lot about the income inequality divide anymore. You know why? Because it's most pronounced in blue states. And it's not just that the rich are getting richer in blue states, which is fine. I don't think a whole lot of people have too much disagreement with that, although billionaires have become the new, robber barons of this age, in many cases justifiably so. It's that we're not building enough housing to allow a middle class to get their foothold into generational wealth. That's the problem. That's the real problem that we face. So, when Politico starts writing an article saying that construction workers have created this problem where the Rio Grande Valley will never go red again, I think that's an overstatement, but I understand exactly what they're saying, which is this dramatic rightward shift we saw in 3 of the last 4 elections, really 5 of the last 6 elections, is going to come back in November of 2026. It is. We're going to see a retrenchment. These Latino voters are going to come back. They will absolutely come back. Now, will that be enough to be a permanent reorientation back to the Democratic Party? Absolutely not. I can say that with, from my estimation, virtually 100% certainty. As bad as the Republicans are, as bad as the Republicans have been at this moment, there's only been a 4% shift amongst young Hispanic men. That's the future. That's where this is all going. And that's a real wake-up call to the Democratic Party. And that mistake, this inability for the Democratic Party to make the adjustments, is the second Politico article. This is one that I was quoted in saying that the Republicans have made probably the biggest mistake politically in a generation. I haven't seen them screw up their own massive opening. In the last 50 years, you can't say that there's something comparable. To have a voter group swing from 2016 at 26% to basically 48%, a 22-point swing in a presidential election, to now dropping almost all of those gains back, almost all of the gains with Latino voters that the Republicans gained during the Trump era have essentially been wiped away for the moment. And a lot of you that have been following me know that, I keep looking at 2018 as the baseline year for these midterm elections. And for good reason. I think it's by far the most comparable year. First of all, it's a Donald Trump midterm. The Republicans have control of the House. They have the control of the Senate. There were ICE raids and crackdowns, and this was the year of caravans on Fox News every year. The Republican, fear machine started ginning up. All of these, all these people are coming through the Darien Gap, and they're the hordes of unwashed masses are coming. The invaders, it's brown men coming to rape your women and steal your children and bring drugs into all of these old frightening ethnic stereotypes that Steve Miller keeps himself awake at night with. Didn't work. In 2018, what we saw was the largest Latino turnout in midterm history. And it was the most anti-Republican vote in midterm history. And the economy was good then, as I keep pointing out. The economy is bad and getting worse. The ICE raids and crackdowns and militarization of our streets is exponentially worse. If it was bad in 2018, man, I don't know how it can't get much, much worse in the 2026 November elections. And the only question in my mind, really, and we're going to get back to this, I'll probably close on this, but there's a lot more I want to cover, is will the Democrats learn the lesson of 2018? Or will they make the same mistake that Republicans just made in the last year by giving back all of these gains? Remember, I just said 2018 was the largest Latino turnout. It was the most anti-Republican turnout in history, in recorded history. But the next three election cycles after that were rightward shifts of Hispanics to a historical degree away from the Democrats. So what you don't want to have happen if you're a Democrat is winning a huge share of the Latino vote again, but have it be a Pyrrhic victory, meaning they will all go back and elect a Republican president again in 2028. The only difference maker is will Democrats learn their lesson? And I'm not too sure that they will. There's no evidence suggesting that they will. Yvette, appreciate you. Anybody that can hit that thumbs up, hit that like, both on Substack, if you don't mind doing that too, for those out there on Substack, on the Substack side of the universe, that would be great. And obviously those of you that are here on YouTube listening as well, give me some feedback too. Let me know if this works, if I can correct and make sure that Substack starts doing this a little bit differently. Does having these two communities make it a difference? Is it good, better, bad? Doesn't make a difference at all. The Axios, let me run through the Axios demographics really quick. As I mentioned, they've got these MAGA Hispanic voters that they're calling them. A lot of them they've kind of characterized as sort of the old remnants of the Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush era. That was kind of my era. I don't really see a lot of those, and maybe it's just because I live in such a small bubble myself. A lot of the Latinos that I was involved with, the Rosario Marins of the world, the Ruben Barraleses of the world, a lot of the leaders that were cabinet members that were very influential in George Herbert Walker's administration or going back to Ronald Reagan's, they've all left the party. Like me, they're like, we've had it. This is just nonsense. This is crazy. But that could have been just sort of an elite thing. There are still a lot of, I've got friends, very dear friends, who are Latino Republicans through all those ages that are now kind of Trumpers. I think they're embarrassed, humiliated at the moment, as they probably should be. But what I will say also is, I think this is a new type of Latino populism that was not present in the Reagan Bush era. And that's not just a Latino thing. I'm seeing it broadly with voters. We have to keep in mind, when I say that the Republican Party is more racially and ethnically diverse during the Trump years than it was up until the 1960s, something significant is changing. Okay. Let me say that again. Under Donald Trump, the Republican Party became more racially and ethnically diverse than since any time since the 1964-65 Civil Rights Act. That's extraordinary. It just defies all of the understanding that we have of racial and ethnic minority voting. The Republican Party under Donald Trump was becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. And so if you say, this is because these are racist voters, They want to be white. They're misogynist voters. They don't like female candidates. You've got to ask yourself some really tough questions, which is why was this not evident for the 30, 40, 50 years prior to that? Like, show me some evidence of that. Explain to me why Hispanics elect women at rates far higher than any other race or ethnic group. I wrote a whole chapter on this called The Flip Side of Machismo, because everyone's like, oh, it's machismo culture. There's no quantifiable evidence of that in a political construct. You can argue the subjective cultural components all you want, and I've got plenty of subjective data to say that's wrong. But show me hard evidence. Show me real data. And you really can't. Even Kamala Harris, her entire political career was predicated on overperforming with Latinos, including Latino men, not just women, but men in California. It's how she became attorney general. It's how she became a United States senator. She beat Loretta Sanchez in Hispanic districts in her own congressional districts. Let's take it out of how is it that a white progressive woman in Miami a few weeks ago, early December, mid-December, how does a white progressive woman beat a Latino Cuban Republican man in Miami if these are all racist, misogynist voters? And on and on and on. Like, I could just show you all of this data. There are people who just refuse to believe it, right? And it's because they are so convinced of their own worldview that they can't come up with any other understanding of why anybody would vote any other way. And I'm not trying to be, not speak pejoratively about Democrats. Republicans do the same thing, except we call them MAGA and we deride them because they're living their own little world in their own bubble and they don't see things any differently. If you want to understand the problem, you're going to have to reach a little bit. And I'm not saying even try to understand these voters. I'm just saying I don't mean understand these voters in an empathetic way. I don't care whether you like them or not, but at least understand the real rationale. Like, let's have a really good quantifiable argument. Otherwise, what are we doing? What are we doing? So your Mexican son-in-law in Arizona, Kathy, the reason more Latinos voted for Trump is because they believed the lies. Maybe, but let me say this. I'm in my mid-50s now. And when I was starting out in my career, what you just said is the exact opposite. If you just said voted for Trump and said for Democrats, that's what Republicans would say. Mexicans, Latinos are too dumb to know who they're voting for. They believe the lies. They believe that Democrats are good on education. Don't they know? Don't Mexicans know that if they keep voting for Democrats, their schools are going to get worse? You know what? They have. Public schools in California are worse than when I was growing up. That's just quantifiable. This is demonstrably, provably true. The state has become a one-party state. Housing has become more unaffordable. The prison to pipeline has gotten worse. The pipeline to prison has gotten worse. The manufacturing-based economy for non-college educators has gotten worse. The income inequality divide has gotten worse. Half of the Mexican Latino children in California are on Medi-Cal, which is a poverty metric. That's gotten worse. I mean, you can't argue with that. So who's lying? Who's lying? They're both lying. They're politicians. They're political parties. Let's stop with the virtue. Let's stop believing these people are just doing right because they're doing right. The Democratic Party was not being honest about this, or worse, what they were not honest about was their clear policy failures. The ideology wasn't working. And rather than fix it, because 70% of Latino children in California graduate from high school needing remedial education. They can't read. They can't do math. Is that Republicans' fault? Of course it's not. I'm not upset, Kathy. I appreciate it. But what I want us to do is challenge our assumptions, because I'm not arguing for Republicans. You all know me better than that. I'm really not. But I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to argue for Democrats because I think the Republicans are bad. What I'm saying is the reason we're at where we're at as Americans is because the system isn't working. And instead of saying my side is complicit too, we double down on throwing the grenades at each other and saying it's their fault. They're lying. They're probably, yes, Trump's a liar. I mean, he's a lot worse than that. I burned out my career taking this guy to task. 100%. You're not gonna get a Trump defense out of me on anything. But that doesn't mean that I think that what the Democrats are doing is working for black and brown people, for poor and working class people, because it's not. It's not. It's not. Stop with that. Stop with that. So let's talk about turnout. And this I think is really fascinating because this group, young Latino men, is the lowest turnout group in America. This is the group that doesn't show up except for on presidential elections. And one of the great ironies is Republicans at this moment in time have banked their entire fortunes on the idea that not only will they get this massive continuance of Latinos rightward shift, but that they're going to show up in numbers to save them. And I'm sorry if I'm laughing, but you got to remember, I've been doing this for 35, 40 years. This group has never showed up. It never showed up for the Democrats. You think they're going to show up in the midst of a souring economy because Trump's tariffs made construction harder to get a job, and he's literally got his foot on the accelerator of running the economy over a cliff? Oh, and he's hunting people down from your own ethnic community? Like, you think that they're going to show up in huge numbers and vote for you in a massive break the way that they did? That's the genius you used in Texas as Republicans to carve out 5 new Republican districts based off of 3 of those 5 on Hispanic majorities. That's your genius. And by the way, to get those 5, you had to make a whole bunch of other red Republican seats more Hispanic in order to get there. Maybe not by huge numbers, but even 2 or 3 percentage points. That's the brilliance that you used. Good luck with that. Good luck with that, because that dog don't hunt. Look, could I be wrong? I could absolutely be wrong. But the environment, what we call the mood of the electorate in February, heading into the November elections, 8 months out, I don't think the economy gets better in any meaningful way with working class voters. I don't think our allies are suddenly going to wake up and go, oh yeah, you know what? He was just messing around, right? We're fine. We trust America again. All's good. It's all good. It's all good. And I don't think for a moment that Donald Trump's going to back off of the ICE raids and the crackdown. Sure, he may be moving some of these jackbooted thugs out of Minneapolis, but he's going to move them into Phoenix. He's going to move them into Los Angeles. He's going to move them into a lot of these blue states, by the way. That's where they're putting most of these people. He's going to put them in blue states, if not to crack down on elections, to have a show of force on elections, then to cause a disturbance with blue states. Well, you know what, Mr. Trump? Most of those battleground seats in Congress are in blue states. They're going to be in Virginia. They're going to be in California. They're going to be in Maryland, which may redraw to get another seat. He's not doing the same type of crackdowns in Texas. I mean, they've got some there, but you're not seeing that same level of activity. Some, but there's some everywhere. They've got to meet a quota. They got to meet Stephen Miller's quota. But you're not going to see them in the Rio Grande Valley doing this kind of nonsense. I could be wrong. I mean, send me notes, put it in the comments, send them to me later. In fact, I may go down there to kind of check it out and see what they're going to be doing, because I'd love to report on that. But boy, if they did that, you're going to see these anti-Republican voters show up in even bigger numbers, pissed off that they even give the guy a second chance in the first place, which begs another question is, how do you accept these people back into the fold, or do you? Do you? And I think that's got to be, that remains for everybody else's own prognostication on what's to do. Bottom line is, I believe turnout's going to be very high in the midterms. I think it's going to be very high. But I also believe that what we call the break, when you're talking about turnout, you have to talk about the break also. There's something called the turnout versus the break. The turnout is the actual raw numbers of people going up. It's also a percentage. The break is what percentage are voting for which party. And when I was growing up, Democrats always tried to increase turnout because 75% of these voters were voting for the Democratic Party. As Republicans, we would try to peel off 2, 3, 4%, and that would kind of break us to even. The Democrats would spend millions and millions and millions of dollars trying to get the turnout model higher, get 2 to 3 points higher in heavily Hispanic districts to advantage their candidates. As Republicans, we would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions, trying to get 2 to 3% of them to shift off. And the reason why we would do that is if they spent millions getting 2 to 3% higher and we had 2 to 3% move away, well, what happens? It's a break even. And if they break even, then that's a win for the Republicans. Used to be. This is in the 90s and early 2000s. That whole construct has changed. Now what you're going to see is Republicans trying, this is the last thing I want to talk about, which is the tactics of turnout. Because here's what happened in 2024. The Democrats spent an historically high number of millions of dollars on turnout. They put a bunch of bodies on the ground to go and just knock on doors, do precinct checks, and turn out voters. They were doing what they've been doing since the 70s. Put bodies on the ground, walk Hispanic precincts, and get turnout. Trump, I don't know if you guys remember this, but you guys are probably very close observers of politics, so let me ask this. What Trump did was he pulled all of his storefronts out of Hispanic precincts. There's a big story about it in one of the news outlets. Adrian Carrasquillo, a great Latino reporter, covered it, broke the story. It was right when Laura Trump took over the RNC. And what happened? Democrats spend all these millions of dollars on the ground. Republicans spend none. And Trump gets the highest shift towards the Republicans in history. What happened? The answer is actually pretty simple. What Democrats have been saying for years is you go to where people are. And in their mind, where you go is where they are, is where they live. And you knock on their door. And once a month or once every other week, you knock and say, hey, I'm from the Democratic Party, just checking in, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, where are Latino voters at? They're right here. They're on their phone constantly, 8 hours a day. And there's Charlie Kirk TPUSA ads, and there's Trump stuff, and there's Latinos for Trump, and there's all this stuff flooding feeds. That's where you win elections now. That's better get out the vote and voter contact and actually door to door. I believe that now. How do you say that's not the case if you look at 2024? Doing both is ideal 100%. But when both parties are doing either or, man, tie goes to the person flooding the phone, not flooding the zone, flood the phone. You flood the phone and you're going to start rebranding and changing people's political perspectives and changing their minds. You can say they're lies. I'm sure some of them are. And that works both ways, as I said. But it's also pointing out some of the failures of their current existence. And that's an important point. One of the reasons why Donald Trump's numbers are falling so low is because he's lying to people about the price of goods right now. But people can see with their own eyes that he's lying. They can see with their own pocketbooks that he's lying. Guess what? Joe Biden did the same thing. The Democrats were lying to working class and poor people, saying, oh, no, your life is not better. The economy is not bad. The prices of these things aren't going up. And moreover, they were saying the borders are under control. And these voters could see it on their own street. That's not what's happening. In New York City, these people were getting hotel rooms. They were getting phones. They were getting, one of the more liberal, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but more open and tolerant refugee systems we've ever had. When people are struggling and in their mind playing by the rules and they see that, that dog don't hunt. That dog don't hunt either. So my point is, and I want to bring this up, is if you think the voters are dumb, and both parties do, or they believe that let me say that read differently. They both believe they have the capacity to pull the wool over the eyes of voters. Voters aren't dumb. They may not be able to explain the intricacies of, how a bill becomes a law or which senators from where, the stuff like we do that, people that just watch this stuff all the time. But I've never approached a campaign thinking that the voters are dumb, because they're not. They're absolutely not. Peggy, you asked a good question about the Bernie, Trump, and DSA voters. I don't know who else would be willing to speak to this. I'm definitely curious about it. So let me wrap on this. And I have kept everybody a long time, but let me say this. Mom Donnie is a perfect example in New York City. Hispanic working class families voted for Eric Adams for mayor. Large plurality. It's a black, centrist Democrat, former law enforcement officer when he first got elected. That was the lane, that was the platform that he ran on. A few years later, they vote for Donald Trump in historic numbers. Not a majority, but very big, very significant rightward shift. 6 months later, they shift back to Mamdani and vote for him in very big numbers. How do you account for that? How do you account for the fact that young Latino men, non-college educated blue collar workers voted for Eric Adams, then moved to Donald Trump, then moved to Mamdani? How do you count that same demographic moved from Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump in Texas and in California and probably in New York City? I haven't looked at those numbers. How do you account for the fact that in 2025, Puerto Rican voters in New York City vote the same as Dominicans in Passaic County, New Jersey, the same as Central Americans in Manassas, Virginia, the same as Cuban Americans in the city of Miami's mayoral election, the same as Mexican Americans in SD Special 9 in Texas last Saturday night and in Prop 50 last November? All of them moving in the same direction. Is that ideological? It's not ideological. So this fight that the Democratic Party is going under is, oh, it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or it's more of a centrist, and whoever, Bashir. Look, guys, let me point this out too. There hasn't been a national poll amongst Latinos that shows AOC doing better than Gavin Newsom. What does that say? What it says is everything I've been trying to drive home. This is not ideology. Stop with the ideology. As long as you're talking about the issues, we're open to the debate. Whether you're talking DSA or whether you're talking Ruben Gallego centrism, they're both valid. There's just such a desperate yearning. Latinos, again, let me say it again. We're the least ideological, least partisan, least racially polarized. That's the hope for America, by the way. If we can break down all of those walls, all of these things that ail us starts to go away, and we start talking about what government can actually do. So this idea is if we go further left, we're going to win more voters. That's nonsense. This idea that if we're more centrist, we're going to win more votes. I think that's nonsense too. I think that it doesn't matter. It depends on where you're at. But what the issues that you have to focus on, one, and the second is the frame. If you're speaking to people on economic pocketbook issues and class issues and opportunity voters, as opposed to racialized, ethnic, aggrieved victims, you're going to do better. Whether that's through a DSA lens or through a centrist lens, does not matter. Does not matter. And I think that the election results have borne that out. I think anybody who's trying to tell you that Latinos are more compelled by AOC type of DSA policies compared to Ruben Gallego's centrism doesn't know what they're talking about. It's probably a pundit on MS Now or CNN or Fox News or something else, because there's no data saying any of that. In fact, all the data says the exact opposite. So be thinking about de-alignment, less partisan, less racialized voting, and you're going to start to, I think, have a new understanding of how the Republican and Democratic paradigm is failing our body politic with the fastest growing segment of voters in this country, which are Latino voters. So with that, thank you guys so much. I've kept you for a long time. Give me your feedback on whether or not this works. If you have come over from Substack to kind of get a little bit more interaction on YouTube, like and subscribe with me here. I'm doing a lot more video here, obviously a lot more writing on Substack. I'm loving them both. I'm trying to find a way to bring everybody together. If this works, let me know. If it doesn't, let me know that too. I'm trying to find, as Peggy and Linda and I think Kathy would say with some of these comments, I call them out because their names are very, very familiar to me. Yvette, also yourself as well. This is like the old mic drop. I'm still looking for that old mic drop platform and where I can take questions in a real-time format. I want to be able to address questions as we head into the campaign season, because a lot of polling data is going to be coming out. There's a lot of shifting in the electorate. The main one, again, is going to be this young male Latino group. Broadly, I suspect the Democrats are going to do quite well, but I think knowing how, where, and why will allow for maximization of effect to move into other seats, whether they're House seats that we'll be talking about specifically, whether it's polling data specifically on message, or whether it's state seats, depending on the Senate, as that starts to come into play as well. I want to kind of provide a perspective from a campaign professional's purview on what that means and what that looks like. So if you've liked what you've seen today, share this, like, subscribe, do all of those things. If you found me on YouTube, please do all those things, and then join me on Substack. If you're on Substack, do the same thing on YouTube, and we'll build a nice, big, happy family. Guys, thanks so much. Enjoy your Sunday, and we will talk next time, hopefully next week.